The moment the words left her mouth, time stopped. "Sir, are you my blind date?" Alexander Royce, one of the wealthiest men in the world, stood frozen in the marble hallway of his private penthouse, his tailored coat still half-buttoned, his phone slipping from his fingers. No one had spoken to him like that in years. No one looked at him like she was looking at him now, confused, nervous, hopeful, and completely unaware of who he really was. For the first time in a decade, Alexander Royce forgot how to breathe. Just hours earlier, he had agreed, reluctantly, to hire a new bodyguard. His assistant had insisted. "You can't live like a ghost forever, sir," she'd said. "Not after the threats. Not after what you've been through." Alexander hadn't argued. Arguing required energy, and energy was something grief had stolen from him long ago. What his assistant didn't know was that Alexander had also agreed, equally reluctantly, to something else that same morning, a blind date. It was his sister's idea. His last living family. "Just coffee," she'd pleaded. "If you hate it, you leave. But promise me you'll try." Alexander hadn't planned to show up. And yet here he was, standing face to face with a woman who clearly believed he was someone else entirely. Her name was Elena Hart. She had arrived 10 minutes early, dressed simply, her hair pulled back in a low ponytail, hands clasped tightly in front of her like she was holding herself together. She had been told her blind date would meet her at the penthouse entrance, an unusual location, yes, but she assumed it was a prank, or maybe a wealthy man with strange tastes. She had no idea she was looking at a billionaire. She had no idea she was about to change his life. Elena had recently lost everything. Her job, her apartment, her sense of safety. A former employer had turned dangerous after she refused to cover up his illegal dealings. When the threats started, she ran. Changed cities. Took the first job she could find. That job was bodyguard training. She wasn't the strongest. She wasn't the most experienced. But she was observant, disciplined, and deeply protective, qualities born from years of taking care of a younger brother after their parents died. When Alexander didn't respond to her question, Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "I must have misunderstood. I was told to meet someone here. A blind date. This is so awkward." "No," Alexander said suddenly, his voice rough, unfamiliar even to himself. "You didn't misunderstand." She blinked. "You didn't." He swallowed. For reasons he didn't yet understand, he couldn't bring himself to correct her. Couldn't bring himself to say, "I'm not your blind date. I'm your employer." Instead, he said, "It appears, I'm early." They sat across from each other minutes later, coffee between them, silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Elena talked first. She always did when nervous. She spoke about growing up poor, about responsibility arriving too early, about how loneliness didn't always look like being alone, it sometimes looked like being surrounded by people who didn't really see you. Alexander listened. No one had spoken to him like this since his wife died. Claire had been the only person who saw past the suits, the boardrooms, the headlines. She had loved him before the money multiplied, before the world demanded pieces of him. When cancer took her, it took Alexander with it. What remained was a shell that learned how to function but forgot how to feel. Elena's laughter, soft, surprised, genuine, cracked something open inside him. At the end of the coffee, before he could stop himself, Alexander said, "Would you like to see the view?" She smiled. "I'd like that." It wasn't until the next morning that the truth surfaced. Elena arrived for her first official day as Alexander Royce's new bodyguard, only to find the man from her blind date standing in the briefing room, flanked by security executives. Her face drained of color. "You," she whispered. Alexander met her eyes. "I owe you an apology." She turned to leave. He stopped her, not with authority, but with honesty. He told her everything. About the blind date. About the loneliness. About the mistake. She listened. Then she surprised him. "You didn't treat me like an employee," she said quietly. "You treated me like a human being. That matters." She stayed. Weeks turned into months. Elena proved herself not just capable, but exceptional. She anticipated threats before they appeared. She learned Alexander's routines, his moods, his silences. And Alexander, slowly, carefully, began to live again. He attended charity events, reconnected with old friends, smiled. But danger has a way of returning when you least expect it. The man Elena had once fled found her. One night, an ambush. A gunshot. Elena stepping in front of Alexander without hesitation. She survived, but barely. At her hospital bedside, Alexander broke. He held her hand and realized something terrifying and beautiful: he loved her. Not as a billionaire. Not as an employer. As a man who had been lonely for too long, and finally found his way back. When Elena woke, the first thing she saw was Alexander asleep beside her bed, his hand still holding hers. Months later, on a quiet balcony overlooking the city, Elena smiled and asked softly, "Sir, are you still my blind date?" Alexander laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in years. "No," he said. "This time, I see you clearly." And for the first time, he was no longer lonely. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories don't begin with intention. They begin with a mistake. And end with healing.